Hi. The goal of this video is to go over the TI-30xIIS calculator, which is what I allow you to use in computational methods. And we'll go through this tutorial just like I did my other tutorial for the TI-30xA, which are both allowed in my comp methods class at the moment. We'll see if that changes in the future. But for now, let's go ahead and pull up our TI-30xIIS. You can see all the buttons here. Let's first learn how to turn it on and off, which is pretty simple. We see that there's an on button. If we click that, it's solar. This turns on. If I want to turn it off, you see that the off button is above the on button in a different color. That different color that you see above most of the keys is related to the second key. So I do second and then click off. You'll now turn off the calculator. Easy. Let's throw some basic math operations. Let's first turn this back on. Okay. If we start with some basic math operations, you have your standard addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. 3 times 5, that is equal to 15. If you wanted to go ahead and use an exponent, you see that there's an x squared here. If I'll go ahead and type in a number like 4, I'll then type in the exponent with this little key there that has x squared on it. If I click enter, I get 16. If I wanted to do a different exponent, I can go ahead and do 4 caret 3 and then get another number, 4 cubed in that situation. So this key and this key are essentially the same exact thing, except this one's limited to x squared. This one could be any exponent. In terms of our simple math and order of operations, if I just read from left to right, 3 plus 4 squared, click enter, you get what you're supposed to get. That's not really a big deal. Now, depending on what you're doing, which is different than the other calculator, you would always type the number in first, and then you would do the operation. So on the other calculator, it would be 25 followed by the square root key. On this calculator, it's the opposite. Really, you do it as if you're saying it out loud. So if I say x squared, I would read it out loud as 4 squared. If I were to do the square root of 25, I would do the square root operator first. Now that operator on here is the radical, which we see is above the x squared. So I'll do second, click that, and you see that now I've started to make the radical. I'll type in 25. I can close the parenthesis if I'd like, and then I would get 5 as my answer. Another thing, oops, give me a second. Sorry. Stock cam is kind of finicky. Okay. Another thing that we can do is 1 divided by 4. If I were to do that, literally 1 divided by 4, that is a fraction. I can write that as 0.25. If you ever have the number like 4 that I want to take the reciprocal of, you can see I have this x to the negative 1 here. If I do 4 to the negative 1, that'll give me the reciprocal of the number and flip it to give me what I need to get. If you want to use parentheses to separate, let's say, a numerator and denominator, you see in this problem, I have 7 plus 3 in the numerator and the square root of 16 plus 6 in the denominator. I'm going to go ahead and include parentheses around those two in order to tell the calculator that that is specifically my numerator and that is specifically my denominator. I'm going to do parenthesis, 7 plus 3, close parenthesis. I've just made my numerator, divided by, I'm going to do another parenthesis to say that everything that I'm writing after this will be in the denominator. For this problem, I have the square root, so I'll do second radical 16. I will close that. So you see I have a parenthesis here for the overall denominator. The square root of 16 is one part of that denominator, plus 6, close parenthesis. Now we see that this is the entirety of my denominator. I'll click enter and get 1, which is what I expect from this math. So parentheses become really important depending on what you're trying to do in your calculator. There we go. I already went over this, but again, the caret is there specifically for other exponents. If I do 2 raised to the power of 3, we get 8, as we expect. Now, piggybacking off of that, if you wanted to do radicals that weren't square roots, but cube roots or anything like that, I would end up using this key here above the caret. You see they're kind of opposites. And if you go ahead and do second followed by that, you see that ANS shows up. It's like, what does that mean? Well, the way that this command works is that this value of x, for example, this 3, I have to type that in first into the calculator and then type the radical. If I do 3, that operator, which has a little x in it of 8, oops, this is saying I'm going to take the cube root of 8, and that'll give you 2. So whatever number you put first is replacing that x. If I do 2 followed by that random exponent of 16, that'll give me 4 because that's the square root of 16. So that's a new one that you may not know how to do, but that's how you'd be able to access other types of roots in your calculator. The next thing is, how do you differentiate between fractions and decimals? Well, if I were to go in and let's say I have a decimal setup, I can go to second, and then there's this F to D button right here. I can do, oops, I think I clicked the wrong one. F to D, if I click enter, you see that we get 1/4. It gives it to us as a fraction where we see the fraction bar. If I were to type 3 divided by 7, it would show up maybe as a decimal, and maybe you say, just go ahead and give it to me as a fraction. You can do that. Similarly, if I had a fraction to begin with, 2/5, a lot of times if you just click enter, just go ahead and show you that as a decimal, as is. But if you ever wanted to switch back and forth between them, you can go ahead and use that F to D that's above the PRB symbol on the calculator. The next thing we want to look at are exponentials. If I have e squared, just saying it out loud, that's going to be second. You can see here that here's the e to the x. That's above this ln. If I do second of e to the x, I'll click maybe e squared and click enter. You will see that I get e squared to pop up. And likewise, if I do the natural log of 2, just saying it out loud, I'll do the natural log of 2. Again, the other calculator, you have to do 2 and then natural log. It's a little bit different. So pick your poison. Now, a very common thing that we need to do is switch between radians and degrees depending on our problem. So if you go ahead and click this DRG button, DRG, I click DRG, you can see that I'm currently in degrees. And then we have radians as another setting. This we're not going to worry about. So if you have degrees, if I were to do sine of 90 degrees, we know that that's going to be 1. If I click enter, you see that that's a 1 because we're in degree mode. If I do sine of pi, and you see that there's a fast digit for pi there, divided by 2, this is currently in degree mode. So this is pi over 2 degrees, which is really weird to think about. But that number doesn't really mean much to us because we have to switch to radians. So to switch, we'll go ahead and click DRG. We'll scroll over to radians and click enter. And you can see now on the bottom of the screen that we are in radian mode. So now if I try to do sine of 90, that's not going to work. But if I do sine of pi over 2, because I'm in radians, that'll give me 1 as we expect. You can also see the inverse trig functions above as well. So we do the inverse trig of 1, and we're in radians, it'll give me pi over 2. Now, let's discuss an example of something that's very important, which is storage. And maybe I'll write this down just to be really explicit. If we go ahead and think about storage, meaning memory, there's this button STO here that will be useful to us to store values you want to keep saved in your calculator. So this is going to be STO. That's a little arrow there, I guess. And that's meaning to store. So let's give an example of this. Let's say that I want to compute this value of x, which is going to be the square root second radical of 17, close it, plus I'll do the same operation for the square root of 10 and click enter. We see that we get this number that's like 7.285. Maybe this number is important to me. Maybe I have other equations for x that are coming later on. So what I can do is click store. And now you can see I have these 5 letters to pick from. You can see that I have a 1 currently stored under A, but I'm going to overwrite that in a second. But you can pick a letter, and then once you're happy with the letter, you can click enter. And you can see that it tells you the answer has now gone to A. It tells you what that answer is. So now that value is stored in memory under that letter. So let's say we calculate something else, where I want to go ahead and take that value that I just stored, which was A, and plug it into this equation. And you see in this question that we also have a numerator and a denominator. So I'll go ahead and use parentheses. So the way to get the number back is to recall it, which is RCL. You can see on your calculator that right above it is RCL. They put it at the same key, essentially. So now what we'll do is say, okay, we'll open up our parentheses. We're going to go to second recall, and you see that there is the letter A. If I click enter, that A is now used in that equation, plus 1, close parenthesis. That's our numerator. We're going to divide by A, that value of x minus 3. So I'll go second recall. I'll use that A again, minus 3. And if I do that, I get some value. So I want to make sure I didn't mess this up. Plus 1 minus 3. Yep, okay. So we'll go ahead and now we'll store that maybe in B. So I'll scroll over to B, I'll click enter. And now I have 2 numbers stored in memory, A and B. And perhaps I need to use them both now. I'll go ahead and say, let's do A squared. So I'll recall A and we'll square it. Plus, we'll recall B and we'll square it. And we get some number. And I think my calculator is a little bit different. I think I messed up the numbers the first time, so we're just going to ignore these numbers. But in general, that's how you get a value. So how do you clear these numbers from memory? Because if you go to recall, you'll see that these numbers are still here. Well, first off, if I just want to overwrite a number, maybe I'll just type a 0 in and say store that under A. If I go to recall, you can see that the 0 is under A now, but B is still maintained. If I want to just reset all of my memory, all I have to do is come to the reset key, which will be a second command. I'll do second reset, and it'll ask you, do you want to reset no or yes? So I'm going to go ahead and select yes, click enter. It says memory cleared. If I go to store, you see that there's nothing under anything anymore because we got rid of them. The last thing I want to talk about is the concept of negative numbers. Unlike, I think the other calculator is a little bit different, but in this one, if I were to do, let's say, -4, your first thought might be, let's type a -4. Now, if you look, when I went to do that, it says answer -4 because this key is reserved for subtraction. If you need to use a negative number, you should use this key. And now if I do that, I end up with -4. So this is the key you should be using for negative numbers. I'm trying to see if there's anything else on here that's important. You have your degrees to radians mode. You have logs instead of ln if you'd like, with 10 to the x versus e to the x. Inverse trig functions, parentheses, exponents. That's essentially all you'll need. And I hope that you learned something new. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.